Stan Gibilisco here, proprietor and operator of amateur radio station W1, GV Whiskey 1, Good Vibrations. Back in the early 1970s, I was attending the University of Minnesota for a short while, for a couple of, for 3 years, actually. And during one of those years, I lived in a dormitory called Frontier Hall. There were 4 dormitories in a sort of quadrangle: Frontier Hall, Territorial Hall, Centennial Hall, and finally Pioneer Hall, which was the most stylish of the buildings and seemed to house the most popular students in the dorm scene. And it also housed in its basement the Gopher Radio Club station, W0YC Whiskey 0 Yankee Charlie. Now that was back in the days when I was WA0 Ocean Kilo Victor. Anyhow, down in the basement there, they had a 75A4 receiver, a Collins 75A4 receiver, a Viking Valiant transmitter that was not used because its power supply had an internal short and you'd get zapped if you touched the thing. And then we had a transmitter that was homebrew, and it stood just in a rack just about as tall as I was, and it ran something on the order of 1,000 watts plate power input. I believe that it had a pair of 813 tubes or something like that. All of this equipment was vacuum tube equipment back in 1973, 74. And almost every night, my roommate and I would go down to that station, and I would operate the radio. And it was usually CW around 7.030 megahertz, where the high-speed crowd hung out. I was into high-speed CW back then. I don't know what kind of keyer they had. I probably brought my own. It was an ICO keyer, sort of a neat-looking little box. Well, not so little, and your basic Vibroplex paddle. Then in the next room, my roommate George would be doing experiments, building circuits of various kinds. He was not a radio ham, but he loved to experiment with electronics. He was a physics major, and I was a mathematics major. Anyhow, this Pioneer Hall, all of the dormitories, people had stereo hi-fi equipment, as they probably still do today in college. And at night, sometimes the floor in the dormitory would be just a cacophony of tunes, loud tunes played on these hi-fi sets. And it turned out, of course, that a kilowatt of CW, whatever mode we were using, but even CW would interfere with a lot of these stereos. So we had some problems with some of the students in the dormitories. I remember one girl in particular kept calling the station, but she never was mean or nasty. She thought I was sort of in charge of the situation, actually, and was kind of contrite about the whole thing. I don't remember exactly what I did, but one thing I didn't do was run QRP. It never occurred to me that I might try the QRP challenge back then. I was into high-speed CW and high power, and I just wanted to blast the airwaves with my fist, and that was about it. That was the thrill I got out of ham radio at that time. Suppose that I had run QRP, that I had taken the QRP challenge and tried to do some QRP DXing instead. They had a 20-meter Yagi, a tri-bander on the roof of that 3-story dormitory building, and they had, I believe, an 80-meter dipole running back and a 40-meter dipole running off, which I used, of course, most during those long Minnesota winter nights. University of Minnesota. Never occurred to me to try QRP. If I had done that, we probably wouldn't have had any of those problems with the hi-fi equipment in the dormitory. Wouldn't have had any of that at all. But I was a power monger back then, and I remember reading one of the comments on a video. I don't think it was one of mine, but one of the videos on ham radio about QRP, and the comment was, life is too short for QRP. To which I would respond, life is too short not to try QRP. I don't do a whole lot of operating nowadays, but when I do, it's mainly on the 20-meter band, although I can operate on all bands HF from 10 megahertz all the way up through 50 megahertz. And I never run more than 10 watts CW output or 7 watts PSK. And I've never had a complaint of any kind of interference to any neighbors' electronic equipment. And nowadays, of course, a lot of different kinds of electronic equipment can get flummoxed by strong signals on any ham radio frequency. Electronics is in almost everything. It can cause, oh, good grief, it can cause your refrigerator to malfunction. It can cause your microwave oven to malfunction. Not that it isn't itself an RF generator. But interestingly enough, had I been a QRP nut like I am today, none of those problems with that RFI or EMI to stereo high fidelity equipment in the dormitories, none of it would have taken place, I imagine. Would have been far below the threshold. What I do today is I would have talked to that girl and say, okay, I'm going to transmit now, and I'm going to reduce power, and I'm going to reduce power, and tell me when you can't hear my signal anymore. And it probably would have been something on the order of 15 or 20 watts output, where she would be unable to detect any effects on her stereo equipment. And then I would say, okay, I'm running X number of watts right now. I am going to cut my power level to 1/4 of that level. So I don't think you're going to hear any more problems on your stereo from this station. But if you do, give me a call and I'll reduce power until you don't have a problem anymore. In other words, I would have been the contrite one, and I would have been, because that kind of thing, interfering with people's equipment, gives ham radio a bad rap. And the last thing ham radio needs among the general population is a bad rap. Anyway, I'm an old man now, a weak old man, a shriveled up old man, so I send a weak, shriveled up old signal out over the air and make contacts thousands of miles away. And I've never had a complaint from any neighbor about any kind of interference. I don't know what the point of all this is, except be weak, be feeble, and enjoy your life on the ham bands. Now and then, at least. Just for kicks. Stan Gibbelisco signing off, saying 73, which means best regards, and so long, which, at any power level, always means, in my favorite fist, did-da-da-da-da-da.